Welcome to the Tea Time Podcast, where it's all about taking a few healthy minutes each day just for you, with your host, Sharissa Bradley.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Tea Time Podcast. I am so happy that you are here. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the evolution of my diet and where it's come from and where it's been and where it's going and where I'm at now. And it is important, I think, for me to share this with you because I often think that people look at my life and the way I look and the things that I eat and think that I am not at the same level that they are in some way, or unapproachable, or that you can't ask me questions about your own health because I'm too far past that point in my own life. And so I think it's important for me to tell you kind of where I came from and what my diet has evolved to become now, because I've gone through a lot of different phases with food and using food as medicine and using food as control and keeping control from myself and things like this. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys today. So first of all, I think I mentioned in the first episode that in the process of my own health, one of the first things that came up was hypoglycemia. So in around 6th grade was when I remember this starting to happen. My mom said it's happened earlier, but I don't actually remember it any earlier than about 6th grade. And I would do PE class, and then right after PE, I had band, and I would go from running around and playing or whatever to playing the flute and blowing a lot of air and just getting, using a lot of energy. And I would end up almost every day practically fainting. And I would go to the nurse's office and I would say, I don't feel good. I'm dizzy. I'm nauseous. Something is wrong. And the nurse would call my mom and say, we're going to send her home. She doesn't feel good. And my mom would say, give her some orange juice or give her a piece of candy because it was just low blood sugar. And I would eat something, sugar usually, or a glass of orange juice, and I would feel better in about 15 minutes, and I would go back to class. And this pattern created a really bad sugar addiction for me. And I would carry bags of candy in my backpack from about 6th grade on through high school and even part of college. I always tried to fix my blood sugar lows when I would have these major crashes of blood sugar and I just could not understand what was going on with me. I would eat a piece of candy. I loved Red Hots or hot tamales and any kind of jelly beans. I loved licorice, and I would just eat candy every single day, probably 2 or 3 times a day, to manage my blood sugar. Nobody ever taught me any other way to manage my blood sugar. It was just, and really not, I didn't really understand what it even was that was happening to me. They just told me, when you feel this way, it just means that you need sugar. That's what they would say, sugar. So you need to eat candy or whatever it is. And that's what I was taught. That's what I was taught by my doctors. That's what I was taught by my mom. That's what I was taught by the nurses in my school. So that's what I knew. And I didn't know how to eat any other way. So I would eat mostly carbs, pasta, bread, pizza, things like that. And all of those foods really heightened these hypoglycemic attacks for me. So I had a really hard time in school because I wasn't getting enough calories and I couldn't really be cognizant of anything that was going on. So my early diet was basically carbs, bread, pasta, things like that, and sugar, candy. And that obviously doesn't make for a very healthy body, but I wasn't a healthy body to begin with, and that's kind of why I was going to these things in the first place. When I got into college and I was cooking for myself and living in my own house, I started making healthier things like whole wheat pastas with a can of sauce and some ground beef with onion, things like that, like assembling healthier foods for myself, or at least what I thought was healthier for myself. Again, still really heavy in carbohydrates and using sugar to maintain my blood sugar levels. And I actually didn't gain control of my blood sugar levels until about 3 years ago. And even still, if you ask family members that know me or live with me, or if you spend any normal length of time with me, I still get these blood sugar crashes. If I eat crappy foods, then it happens. It's just like an inevitable part of eating foods that don't really work for my body. So as I was dealing with a celiac diagnosis about 3 years ago, and I changed to eating less grains, less carbohydrates, no sugar at all during an elimination diet, I realized that those were actually perpetuating my health problems and not helping me control them at all, but rather having like this really massive in control addiction, really. So my diet has changed significantly over the last 3 years, but it didn't happen all at once. It happened in this really slow progression. So when I was younger and I was eating, crappy foods, whatever, and I thought I was doing better, healthier options, making healthier options, I wasn't. I was just eating more versions of crappy foods. And then even when I changed to gluten-free to cut this out of my diet so that I could potentially reverse autoimmune disease, I was still eating the crappier versions. I was just eating the gluten-free cinnamon rolls or the gluten-free donuts, things like that. Then when I got really serious about my health, because I didn't want to feel crappy anymore, I wanted to do whatever it took, and I would go all in to make sure that I had health and wellness and I could be a person who took care of my family. I did the autoimmune protocol, and that is a very strict elimination diet where you cut out dairy and gluten and grains and nuts and chocolate and coffee and everything that I was eating, soy and sugar and dairy. I'm sure I said that, but all this huge chunk of food that just kind of comes out, and really you're just left with vegetables, fruit, and meat, and that's it. And I did a lot of soups and a lot of broths. But unfortunately, that didn't solve all of my food problems, because when I started doing this elimination diet, I realized I actually had a lot of psychological food problems, and a lot more than I realized. And I really used food as a coping mechanism. Not only was I using sugar to help maintain my blood sugar levels, I was basically being controlled by the amount of sugar I put into my body and how I felt afterwards. But I didn't have any ability to stop any of that. But I did have a lot of anxiety when it came to changing my diet. And when I did, and I went really strict into this autoimmune protocol, which is a strict diet if you follow it precisely, and it actually created a ton of food fear. And I couldn't go to restaurants because I felt like they were going to poison me. And I wouldn't go to friends' houses for dinner because I thought for sure that they would just do it, like put something in my food on purpose just to see if I was actually sick. Like I had these crazy paranoia around food because it just was such a strict, huge life change for me. I had panic attacks when I would go to the grocery store, and I would say, I went to Roots, this organic grocery store in Temecula, and they have all these bulk things. And I really needed something from the bulk section, but oftentimes I had read that bulk food containers were not gluten-free because they could mix or cross-contaminate with whatever they want to mix them with. And they don't have to tell you what was in it before. So I asked them if it was safe. The manager came out and actually got me whatever it was that I needed fresh from the back, from the boxes, so that he could guarantee that it never touched the plastic bins. And as grateful as I was for that, I also felt really awful for putting myself in this, center of attention position where like somebody would have to like go out of their way for me. And it was such a weird, crazy feeling. And I had a panic attack in the store, and I ended up leaving and not actually buying the thing that he went in the back and got for me because I just couldn't cope with getting to the front of the line. This was a really horrible food time for me where I was just like terrified of anywhere that I went, grocery stores, even food that I made at home. I ended up throwing away all my pans or giving away my pans and getting all new ones that had never touched gluten before. I mean, it created so much fear in my life that even just that fear when I would sit down to eat a meal would create a response in my body. Like I was putting so much stress. And if you haven't heard my episode on stress yet, go back and listen to it, because our body is perceiving stress the same way no matter what kind of stress it is. So as the feeling of stress that I had about food was enough to create a physical response in my body that was similar to me being, glutened or like getting cross-contamination or things like that. So I would have these reactions all the time. And it kind of seemed like I was reacting to every kind of food there was. And I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm hypersensitive. I can only eat soup or broth, because I was having all of these reactions to anything that I ate. And it took me a very long time to figure out that I was actually just putting so much pressure and stress around meal times and around the things that I can and can't eat. And I was very clear about, I can't eat this and I can't eat this and I can't eat this, when really I was just putting all this crazy pressure on myself to kind of uphold these standards of a diet. And even as I started to get better and heal and get healthier, holding on to that stringent plan was detrimental to me. And it was really hard on me to tell people, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. And I felt at one point, just kind of like a leper, like I was an outcast or an outsider, because there were so many things that I couldn't do. And I'm saying this to myself and to other people, I can't do that. Well, I can't go there. And I was having a lot of fear. I went to a mixer for a networking group, and it was inside of a brewery. And the entire time I was so nervous and sweating and just like felt insane, because I was so worried that somebody might spill their beer on me, and that beer was going to like absorb into my skin, and then I was going to have this horrible reaction, and I couldn't pay attention to anything else. And it took everything in me to stay there and to withstand it. And then by the time I left, I was sick anyways, because I was so stressed about this thing that might possibly could happen, because I've got such strict rules about food. And this really isn't the only time that I've done this in my life. As a kid, and even in my young adult years, I had a lot of things going on in my life that I couldn't control. My home situation, my friends, family, I lost a lot of people at a young age, kind of back to back, people that I really cared about and kind of felt like I needed as an anchor in my life, and they were gone kind of all right in a row. And I realize now, looking back, that during those times of really out of control life, that I used food as a way to control myself. And I would go like an entire day without eating a meal. And again, with hypoglycemia, that's like very messed up and not good. And it definitely doesn't feel good. But I would run on adrenaline, and I would run on that anxiety all day long. And I would get to 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night and realize I hadn't eaten any food. And instead of looking at it like, oh man, I really need to eat something, that was so stupid of me, I was proud of myself for how long I could go, because it was something in my life that I could control. And I would go long periods of time, and I wouldn't do it consciously, but looking back, I wasn't mad about it. I was proud of myself for not stopping, just working all day long and not needing to be controlled by food, even though that was the one thing I was controlling. And I realized that as I'm going through this unhealthy relationship with food, just in the last year or so, with this strictness, I was realizing that this isn't the first time, and I kind of have these unhealthy relationships with food. And it wasn't just that food necessarily was affecting me, which it was. I wasn't feeling good. Gluten definitely makes me feel crappy, but the thoughts and the pressure and the stress and all of the things that I put behind that I can't eat gluten, I can't eat dairy, that was what was detrimental to me. Just like me having control over how many meals I had in a day, or not eating all day long, or something along those lines, that control, that learning that thing was kind of holding me back, that was a huge step for me. It was like a kind of like an awakening, like, whoa, crap, I have this really bad relationship with food. And it isn't even just that I'm having a problem with it with my health, but I have this mental attachment to it that's probably also causing me a lot of harm, and maybe in some way caused a lot of damage a long time ago that has escalated and gotten to this point. And now recognizing that, I've been able to make a lot of changes in my life, and a lot more healthy changes, a lot more changes that focus on balance. One thing, because I made myself not eat all day long for years and years, and not ever in a row, but like definitely it happened, and I'm definitely not proud of it, but it's something that I went through in my life and used it as kind of a coping mechanism. And it worked at that point. But now, in order to make sure that that doesn't happen again, I have to make myself, okay, it's breakfast time, so we're going to eat breakfast, and it's lunchtime, so we're going to eat lunch. And yes, I definitely talk to myself in like a we perspective. We are going to go have dinner now. And even if there isn't anybody else in my house to feed, which luckily I do have children that I get to feed and a husband that I feed, and that makes it so that there's food in the house, and then I have to kind of participate in that. And that's really helpful for somebody who's had to control that aspect of their life, to kind of have it around and have it be a really normal thing. And then the other big thing that I did for myself this year was I let go of that fear and that stress behind food, and I stopped making those strict requirements for myself. So I no longer say like, I am autoimmune protocol, or I'm doing the AIP, or I'm paleo, or I'm keto. And instead, I just focus on eating the best things that work for me, and try to stick to, the cleanest diet that I possibly can. And what that ends up looking like, I'm pretty boring when it comes to food now. I love eggs and bacon for breakfast. That's what I had this morning, 2 eggs over easy and 2 pieces of bacon, and usually fruit, but I'm out right now. And then for lunch, I usually have leftover dinner, which is always the exact same thing. And that's a protein from an animal source. I'm not a vegetarian or vegan. I need protein. I try to get the most ethically raised that I can from this amazing farm, a couple amazing farms here in Temecula. So protein coming from an animal source, and a vegetable of some kind. And then usually I do a starch, but the starch is like sweet potato or butternut squash or acorn squash or a zucchini, something like that, a vegetable that is starch-like, that fills that place. And then usually a big salad. And then again, I save a little bit and have that for lunch the next day. I do eat other things outside of the strict diet that I had before, and I never say that I can't eat something anymore. Instead, I heard this really wonderful thing from a friend of mine, and she said, instead of saying I can't eat it, I say I choose not to. And so for right now, as I'm reversing autoimmune disease, it took about 6 months to get the antibodies down, and I believe it's going to take a couple of years to reverse all of the damage. And I'm about year 3 now, so I'm giving myself a little bit more time. But in that time frame, I am choosing not to eat gluten, and I'm choosing not to eat dairy. But otherwise, I do open myself up to eating other things that I know aren't going to hurt me, or that I know I don't get hurt from, or have any kind of a reaction from. I always want to be putting the best ingredients inside my body, because I feel like that's how I'm going to get the best output. And if I want to have energy, and I want to be here, and I want to have longevity, it only makes sense to me to put good ingredients in. But with those ingredients, I'm not so strict with myself anymore, and I allow myself to go outside of the lines that I've previously set for myself. And I discourage people from sticking to something super strict, because when we have the mindset behind the strictness, we often start to feel deprived, and that deprivation in the brain, like I said in the last episode, when we're trying to change things, that deprivation is going to really make you feel like you're not getting the things that you need. And you might even see this affecting other areas in your life. Your sleep, your stress levels, your hormones, things like that can be affected by these strict protocols that you're putting on yourself. And trust me, I get it, because I like to try to control my environment, whether or not that's the most healthy thing. I find myself doing it naturally. That's something I've always done. And I work now to try to let go of some of that control. And in doing that, really trying to be kinder to myself and let myself have, something fun every now and then. Yesterday, for the first time in 3 years, I ate a gluten-free bundt cake from Nothing Bundt Cakes, and I do not feel bad about it. It was so amazing, and it didn't have any gluten in it. It didn't hurt me in any way. I felt great before, during, and after. I went into it with the best attitude that I am totally fine. to have a treat every now and then that doesn't set me back in my health or my healing, and also does support and benefit my mental health, because I had been really wanting a piece of cake for a very long time, and I was starting to feel deprived, and I let myself have something that gives me joy. And we do have a lot of emotional connections to food. So if you can do that, if you can bring joy to yourself without having the negativity or the negative self-talk after the fact, right? If I did kind of see myself going down that path after I was eating, or while I was eating this cake yesterday, and I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm so bad for eating this cake. And then I was like, hold up. No, I'm not bad at all. This is amazing. I feel amazing. And I don't have to justify deserving or not deserving anything in my life. If it feels good and it suits me and it makes me happy, then I see no problem with it. But that's definitely not the Sharissa that you would have met a year ago, who was a lot more strict and a lot more like by the book. And if you didn't follow the book, then you weren't going to be healthy. And obviously that was my problem then. And now I'm growing and learning that maybe it's better to have a little bit more balance, or maybe a little bit more in the middle of the pendulum. And at one point in my life, I was on one side so far out of whack with eating sugar and candy and all, like that's all I survived on. That's how I managed blood sugar lows in order to survive. I ran track. I would come home and eat a carton of ice cream every day because I was so energy depleted. That was the only thing that brought me back up, because I never knew how to combine fat and protein to give myself sustainable energy that actually made sense for me. So now I eat this like really great combination of protein and fat and good carbohydrates and good trail mix and nuts and seeds and proteins and sometimes hummus and garbanzo beans and sometimes labna, which is an Arabic yogurt that I absolutely obsessed with. And I don't feel badly about it because my body is healing and it's getting better and it's more capable of dealing with some of these things. And as it's growing, so am I. And I'm allowing more of that into my life. But the best and the biggest takeaway here is to learn whatever it is that your relationship is with food. And maybe it's not something that you're having currently, but something maybe from before that's affecting you now. Like when I wasn't eating all day long, I changed the way my appetite is. So it's very hard for me to get hungry or to have an appetite and naturally go to seek food. I have to set a timer on my phone that says, go eat something now. Otherwise, I end up getting to a place where I start to feel a little nauseous and I'm like, oh shoot, I haven't eaten yet. I have to go eat something. And that was a bad relationship with food problem from way back when that now I had to adjust and learn and make those changes. And then now learning with my control with food hadn't changed. It hadn't stopped. It just became something else, and it evolved into this very strict, you have to eat this many meals and you have to eat this much at this time and these calories and this protein and this fat, which exhausted me. It was like a full-time job just trying to maintain my diet. And now I just eat what feels good. I've built a pattern. It's become a lot easier for me, but it took a long time. And I'm a lot more lenient with myself, a lot more self-care, a lot more self-love. And what I find is that even when I accidentally get something that I shouldn't have had or wasn't supposed to have, the reaction is very, very minimal, if at all. Maybe a little bit of a slight headache, maybe a little bit of bloating. And then I realize like, oh, maybe there was something in that food that I wasn't supposed to have. But I'm not getting these full-blown attack or episodes from autoimmunity because I'm going in with a positive attitude. I'm doing my absolute best. If something happens, something happens. But otherwise, it's all gonna be okay. I hope you learned something new today, and I hope to talk to you all next week. Bye.
Thank you for spending your tea time with us. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Living well and shining on what you're about. Eating well is loving from the inside out. So take the time to love yourself. Take your plans off of the shelf. It's for all you love, with all that you do. Don't forget to love you too.